Question for you guys, just want to gauge the room. How many of you have ever been afraid of the dark? Just a few people? Wow. Not even as a kid? Well, fear of the dark is actually very common, not only amongst children, but amongst adults as well. Scary images and stories, common objects and sounds we can't immediately identify because they are masked in darkness really fuel our imaginations and grow our fear of the dark. And for young children who do not yet know the difference between the reality and fantasy, they really depend on adults to help them interpret the world. My brother and I could definitely identify with that as children. We weren't exactly afraid of the dark, but we were a little disturbed by how some things appeared in the dark. Sometimes the shadows from our nightlight would take the form of something disturbing to us. I remember once that my brother had a purple and white striped suit. And one night, our closet door was left open, and in the dark, that purple and white striped suit appeared to be a black and white striped suit. And I think we all know who wore that black and white striped suit. So for a moment, my brother and I really did believe that Beetlejuice was living in our closet because of this suit. And so because I was the oldest by only 18 months, I had to conjure up the courage to get up and close the closet door. And that was the first and last time that my brother ever referred to me as the big sister. And I'm a grown woman and I still can't watch that movie. But for many, the darkness, it really has become this metaphor for all things bad. And what many of us tend to think of darkness, we also tend to think of crime, danger, evil. And the passage from today applies this metaphor in a similar way in regards to a spiritual rather than physical darkness. We know that when God created men and women, he created a good and pure thing, but evil came into the world and tainted God's creation. And all of a sudden, humankind became subject to this life of darkness, bound to sin, that God never intended for us. He never intended us for us to live that way. And so this darkness, the metaphor for darkness, represents this broken bond between God and his creation. But God did something about it, thank goodness. We know that he sent his son to cast out that darkness. When he lived, people were touched. Cold hearts became warm again. People were healed of sickness. Justice prevailed, and the outcasts were finally able to go home again. And when he died, evil no longer had the final say. So he lived and he died and he rose so that we could live differently, liberated from the darkness that we were once bound to. The light of Jesus Christ shines so brightly over the darkness, almost like an invasion. And this passage reminds us today that we no longer have to live in that dark place. Because of the light of Jesus, our lives have been transformed. Peter says that we're a chosen race, God's own people. The greatest being of this existence has chosen us. He's chosen to love us and lead us and comfort and guide us. He's chosen to show up for us time and time again. but we've also been chosen to partner with him in doing what we can to be blessings to our communities and making disciples for the transformation of the world. The word says that we are a chosen race, and with that comes responsibility and expectation. Peter says that if we decide to choose God too, choosing to walk in the light of Jesus Christ, then our actions must reflect that. Walking in the light is not simply a Sunday morning activity. Walking in the light is a 24-hour practice. The word says, "Rid yourselves, therefore, of all malice, guile, insincerity, envy, and all slander." Peter's saying here that now that we're living this new life in the light, there's a way that we must conduct ourselves. Jesus didn't light up the world so that we could keep doing the things that we've always done before. Our lives must be governed by love and graciousness. Because we've been transformed, we don't spew out negativity anymore. Because our lives have been transformed, we treat our neighbors like we love them. He goes on to say that like living stones, we should allow ourselves to be built into a spiritual house, a habitation of the Spirit where God dwells. We as believers are the living stones of the church that Jesus has promised to build. And as integral parts of the building of God, we can have security and confidence in what God is doing in our lives. God is this leader and master builder, places his living stones just where he wants us to be. A house that God builds exceeds any house that we could ever attempt to build on our own. As we walk in the light of Jesus, we have to ensure that God is always our foundation. Because a house without him just isn't sustainable. Peter describes our expectations as living stones to declare truth and love, glorifying God in all that we do and say. And for many of us, this may come easy most of the time. And for the most part, our actions might be godly. Our words might be godly. But maybe there's that small percentage of the time that still needs some work and some prayer. When we choose to walk in the light, we have to make sure that we're all in. And when you've made that decision to allow the light of Jesus to shine in you, you've got to be intentional about keeping that light on. If you're not completely certain that you're truly walking in the light of Jesus 100% of the time like Christ, I encourage you to ask yourself, is God dwelling in me? Is God living here permanently? Or do I just allow God to come in every now and again, just for the weekend, and then expect him to head out on Sunday night? If you're not certain that the answer to that is yes, I encourage you to make a list of the reasons why that might not be the case for you. And take those things to God. Arrange a meeting with God and talk about it. Because God can do something with those hindrances, those distractions, the things that get under our skin. When we allow God to truly live and dwell in us, something truly amazing happens. We begin to live that life that was taken away from us, this life of love and peace and fullness. But you know, for many of us, walking in the light may not be our reality. Life gets tough. And there are moments when the darkness seems to have a stronghold over us. Perhaps you've found yourself in the dark and you know that there is light somewhere, but you can't quite get there. My former professor, Barbara Brown Taylor, wrote a book titled Learning to Walk in the Dark. And she says in that book that there are times when many of us do find ourselves in dark places. And we just don't know what to do. She explains that there are so many things that can be learned in those dark moments and overcome if we find that we're still walking in the dark. One thing that I know for sure is that when we find ourselves in places of darkness, God is still there too. And because Jesus came to light up our lives, we can have confidence in knowing that we're not bound to it, that we no longer have to feel bound to it. We're no longer bound to conflict, unrest, weariness, or fear. The light of Jesus shines in the darkness. And for that reason, we don't have to be afraid of the dark. Seasons in the dark enable us to develop a great appreciation for Jesus and for his willingness to do what he did for us. A friend of mine told me once that if it weren't for the darker moments in her life, she wouldn't even know how much God truly loves her. It's a beautiful thing to be able to look back at where you used to be and realize how far you've come. By the grace of God, we don't have to go back to that place. By the grace of God, we don't have to be that person that we used to be. As a child, the darkness made me uncomfortable at times. But there are so many things that I can appreciate about the darkness today. At night, it's so quiet. It's so peaceful. I've always been really fascinated with the sky and the stars, astronomy. I love the planetarium. If you take me to the planetarium, I'll love you forever. The sky, the night sky is so beautiful to me, especially in the country where you can actually see the stars. And when I look up at the moon in the sky, I really do feel the presence of God. I love to pray at night and look at the sky. But the moon, it reflects only a fraction of the sun's rays, but it shines so brightly into the night sky. When you look at the moon, you could see remnants of past collisions. It's got all those blemishes. But blemishes and all, it's still shining. And blemishes and all, we can still shine. God has chosen us. What an honor it is knowing that he thinks so much of us and that he would go through such great lengths to save us. And for that reason, it's time that we build our houses the way God has always intended them to be, and allow the marvelous light of Jesus to shine brightly within our hearts. For those who are still walking in the dark, we, the church, can be their light. Matthew 5:16 says, "Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." We can be the loving presence that our neighbors, that our communities need. Because God has chosen us to be his hands and feet, we've got to delve deeper, considering the things that we must do long term to transform this world that we live in. And while we're doing that, we have to make sure that we're maintaining the light of Christ in all other areas of our lives as well. I encourage you to let God's light shine in every room of your heart. Walk in the light and allow everyone you know, every single person that you encounter, to know who's living and dwelling in you. This little light of mine, I am going to let it shine. And my prayer is that you will allow yours to shine too. Amen.